Great view, huh? I'm standing here along the banks of this big river to tell you about our next H2 Old Testament story. Our story today is about a group of people that was trapped with no way out. It's from the book of Exodus, and it's about a guy named Moses. Now, God sent Moses to help save his people from slavery in Egypt. They had been slaves for hundreds of years, working hard and barely surviving. They cried out to God for help, and God heard their cries and sent Moses to rescue them. But the ruler of Egypt, a man named the Pharaoh, did not want to let them go. So when Moses and the Israelites finally left Egypt behind and escaped into the desert, Pharaoh and his big army chased after them. After a while, the people reached water, a place called the Red Sea, and they noticed that Pharaoh's army was following them. They were trapped and afraid. They couldn't see any solution to this big problem. So they got angry and began grumbling against Moses. "What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt?" they said. "Why didn't you leave us alone? Now we are trapped and will surely die." It seemed like the Israelites had no way out, but Moses was not afraid. He said to them, "Stand firm and you will see that God will deliver us. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Then the Lord spoke to Moses. "Tell the Israelites to keep moving," he said. "Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water, so that the people can walk across on dry ground." So Moses stretched out his hand, and the power of God flowed through him, sending a strong wind to divide the water. The Israelites passed through on dry ground with a wall of water to their left and right. The Egyptian army tried to pursue the people, but God sent a pillar of fire to slow them down. He made the wheels of their chariots fall off, but they kept chasing after the Israelites. So once God's people had crossed the sea and the army was in the process of crossing, God had Moses stretch out his hand again, and the waters flowed back together, sweeping the army out to sea. That day, the Lord saved Israel from the cruel hands of the Egyptians, and when they saw his power, they put their trust in him and in his servant Moses. That's a pretty amazing story, huh? I mean, look at this big river, and this was nothing compared to the Red Sea. Imagine being trapped on the banks of a river with a whole army chasing after you. The water was too deep, and there were no boats, and there were definitely no bridges. What would you do? I know what I'd do. Panic. And that's exactly what the Israelites did. They couldn't see any way out of this big problem. But Moses knew that God had sent him to save the people from Egypt. Moses knew our big idea for the day. God's power can turn any problem around. When you have a problem that seems too big, too impossible for anyone to help you with, remember that just like Moses, you can trust God no matter what. He might not fix it exactly how we think it should be fixed, but God has the power to help us with even our biggest problems. Sometimes things are impossible for people to fix, but nothing is impossible for God. That's what the Israelites learned that day at the Red Sea, and that's why they put their trust in God. Trusting God doesn't mean that our lives are automatically going to be easy and that nothing bad will happen to us. But we can know for sure that God will be with us in our times of biggest trouble. We can trust him no matter what, even with our biggest, scariest, hardest problems. And we know that God's power to turn our problems around is just as strong today as it was back in Moses' time. Well, that's all I have for you this week. Make sure you come back and join us next week for our last H2 Old Testament story. I can guarantee you it will be a whale of a tale.